It's been a minute, fight fams, but we are back in the war room with my beautiful people, Mr. Eddie Goldman. He is we call him the conscious of combat sports, and my sister. She is a women's boxing historian, Malissa Smith. We are going to kick it off right to you, Eddie, today. There has been so much going on. We have been out of the loop for a minute. But Eddie, I want you to give us an update on what's happening in the Olympics because there it is an update. World Boxing's on the scene under the tutelage of Mr. Boris. I don't know his last name or may not be able to pronounce his last name.
Vandervorst.
Vanderforst. So yeah, I'd love to hear what's happening with the Olympics and if that's going to be happening, if Olympic boxing is going to be happening in 2028. So take it away, sir.
Well, the short answer to your question is we don't know at this point, and it's kind of looking doubtful the way things have been developing. I we just been discussing this for a while, and what I said last year was that yeah, we're talking about LA 2028, but that world boxing has to be recognized as the official Olympic Boxing Federation by the IOC by sometime in early 2025, or else all bets are off. Then they floated different dates and all sorts of different things were put out by different officials. One official said boxing will definitely be on the program for 28. Another one said recently, no, it's not definite, but there's no deadline. They specifically asked about the deadline, and he said no deadline. Well, there is a deadline, and there always has been a deadline. They got to get their acts together. A body that really isn't well known outside of the Olympic movement, the Association of Summer Olympic International Federations, ASOF, had its General Assembly a couple of days ago. And they discussed a number of different topics about Paris. And also, they got a report from the LA 28 organizing committee. And the timeline that they laid out for this was that they're going to start having discussions after Paris in December of this year, in January of 25. Then they're going to have a proposal for the IOC's Olympic Program Commission and then the IOC Executive Board during the first quarter of 2025. Then that will formalize the events. In other words, a little over 3 years before LA 2028, they will make definite, barring any other event like the pandemic or a war or something, what events are on and what events are not on for the LA 2028 Olympics, because there's an enormous amount of work that they have to do. They have to sign contracts with all the venues. They have to work out a schedule. They have to coordinate with all the different national or international federations to get their schedules together. For example, some sports like boxing take place over many days during the Olympics, and wrestling too. Other sports are over just in a couple of days, and you have to have the order of them so you don't have too many events on one day and too few events on another day. You have to do all that stuff and get the contracts in place. You have to inspect the venues, most of which, maybe all of which, have already been built. You have to see if they'll hold enough fans. You have to do all that kind of stuff. And that's a lot of work. So the schedule will be completed in the second quarter of 2025. So really by the first quarter of 2025, the IOC has to decide, will they have boxing on the Olympic program? Which means they will have to, at that point, decide, will they recognize an Olympic federation? And the only one out there, they specifically said, it ain't going to be the Russian-led and financed IBA. In fact, interestingly enough, there was some Russian comedians called up Bach on a prank call, and they recorded it all. Bach didn't know it was a prank. And the comments he had about Umar Kremlev, the guy that runs IBA, were just really very sharp. He called him corrupted and corrupting. He said the guy had to change his name because of his criminal past, and he went on and on. So there's no reconciling likely at all with the IBA. So it's either going to be they recognize world boxing, or somebody else comes out of the blue and it just seems too late for that.
Mhm.
Or they're going to say, forget it, and boxing will no longer be an Olympic sport unless world boxing gets more members, runs more tournaments, and is more broadly represented around the world. Because right now they're very heavily represented in Europe and the English-speaking countries, but there are just so much more of the world that they have to bring on. And this is the dilemma for world boxing. What they need to do is get more of these national federations to sign on with them, which means those federations would have to leave the IBA, because IBA has said very clearly, if you're in another international federation, you can't be an IBA. It's one or the other. And right now, so many of these national federations appear to be very happy to take whatever money they're getting from the Russian-led IBA for their leaders, to take whatever equipment they're sending them and all of that, and not really caring if they're in the Olympics or not. Well, surprise, surprise, if boxing is cut from the Olympics and becomes a non-Olympic sport, the funding that they get from the various governments and national Olympic committees dries up, and it goes to the existing Olympic sports. So they're going to have a very rude awakening. And the question is, are there enough non-corrupt national federations out there that can join world boxing and do it in time? And I think the thinking is, okay, we're just a couple of months out from Paris. So the IOC, for the last time, they said, is organizing the boxing at Paris. So after that's over, then they're going to have to make some very quick decisions. And also, leaving IBA and joining world boxing, it's not something that you just don't send like a Dear John letter or something like that. There are legal issues. There are contracts involved. There, as I said, under the there are various national Olympic committees. They have to do it in a legal way, and there's a certain amount of red tape for some of these organizations. In some countries, you're going to have disputes over it. Some will want to leave and stay in the Olympics. Some will want to stay and take that Russian money and whatever. So there's not a lot of time to get this done.
Well, Eddie, how far out do you think world boxing is away from actually beginning, becoming a legit IOC body so that the folks can compete in the Olympics?
Pretty far. They have 27 national federations.
How many do they need?
They
need 40.
40?
They need 40. Yeah.
Okay.
More
That came out
than
today.
just 40. It
Minimum
depends.
of 40.
It depends where they are.
Okay.
If there's nobody from Asia and nobody from Africa,
Sure.
it's very difficult to establish yourself as a recognized Olympic federation, because there are plenty of non-Olympic sports that are popular in one region or another of the world, but in other regions, nobody participates, or it's very, very tiny. I'll just give an example of Sambo, which is a great sport, in my opinion. But outside of Russia and Eastern Europe and a couple of other countries, there's virtually nothing going on in Sambo. So they said that they want to get into the Olympics at some point, but they're far, far off from being able to do so, aside from political problems that also exist with a Russian-led federation. But even leaving that aside, they just don't have wide enough support. And this is a big, this is a big obstacle, and they really have to move on it. And then you have situations like in Ireland where they had a vote on this. The majority voted to leave IBA, but they needed, I forget whether it was 2/3 or 3/4, and they fell short of that. And there was some people that said, "Oh, the world boxing is just the U.S. and England, and we can't have anything to do with them," and just getting into this ridiculous political view of things. Meanwhile, boxing, which I think is the most successful sport for Ireland in the Olympics, right now, there could be no boxing in 2028. And so you had this situation in Ireland. You had a situation in Nigeria where some officials said we're joining world boxing, but other officials said, no, we're not. I'm not sure how that was actually resolved, but there are going to be disputes going on in some of these major countries. And Nigeria is a country with the largest population in Africa.
I think though
it's a
that
mess.
there's, because the IOC has been very clear that they have disassociated themselves finally and forever from the IBA.
Mhm.
The fact that there will be the Olympics in Paris and there will still be boxing will kind of perhaps push that little bit of a window over in a place like Ireland, where those kind of arguments about the IBA and sticking with the IBA will suddenly, perhaps, hopefully fall away a bit, because they're no longer in the picture. IOC has said, no, you're done. And if they want to stay in the Olympics, they're going to have to go with world boxing or nothing. The other thing, and this was interesting, I think it just was today, WBC's Maurizio Suleiman had a big article that was published on the WBC site in support of world boxing. So we'll
sort of in support.
Well, yeah, I mean, calling certainly enough so that Boris is interested in it, and will make a call to him to see what, whether there's opportunity there to help have organizations like WBC help push for joining world boxing, because WBC's in countries all over the world, and they do a lot of support of amateur boxing, certainly in Latin America and in Asia. So there may be some opportunities there for some pressure on these organizations to really take a second look at world boxing as being the organization that will maintain the continuity of boxing as an Olympic sport. We'll see.
Absolutely.
That's a minefield, because the WBC has ties with the Boxing Federation in Uzbekistan, which is in essence run by its vice president, Gafir Rakhimov, who was one of the former heads when it was known as AIBA. The U.S. government has linked him to organized crime. He was banned from the Sydney Olympics, so they think he sued about that or something. The point is that they had a celebration of Gafir Rakhimov, and Rakhimov is basically persona non grata for, I don't know if IBA's condemned him, but certainly with the world boxing people. So I think WBC wants to become directly involved in amateur boxing. And it's one thing if they support world boxing, but I just think it's going to create a minefield if they get directly involved with that. And I'm sure the people in world boxing are well aware of all these conflicts. That's the problem when you have such a corrupt sport. We have so much corruption going on, and you have a short period of time to recreate something that is not, at least not viewed as corrupt. They have a big task, and I hope they succeed in doing so. I'm just laying out that it's not so easy. When they announced, whenever it was, I guess last year, they have their 27 members. They haven't gotten really, I don't think they've gotten too many people to join in the last several months. Now, again, you have, and that shouldn't affect what's going on for Paris, because again, that's being organized directly by the IOC. So there's a lot of work to be done, and it's far from guaranteed that this is going to get worked out. And the worst case scenario could really come to fruition if the Russians throw enough money around and they want to control the heads of some of these federations and say, well, you could send your people to their so-called friendship games, and we'll pay out prizes and all this type of stuff, but don't go to the Olympics. There are going to be very few Russians who are going to be called neutrals at the Olympics. And with finding out more and more these Russian athletes have violated the terms that the IOC set out, where you can't be pro-war, you can't have expressed support for Russia's aggression against Ukraine, you can't be part of the military or the law enforcement services. And some top athletes have been banned, such as Sadalayev, a two-time Olympic gold medalist in wrestling, was denied a chance to compete in an Olympic qualifier where he very well might have won. And this guy's a great wrestler, two-time gold medalist, won a couple of world championships. He had some losses last year after sitting out, but the point is that he's an elite wrestler, and he can't wrestle because of these stipulations. It's not a good the whole thing is just not a good situation for world boxing. They have a lot of work to do, and I hope they succeed, and I hope we can help them do that. And where people around the world listen, it's some of these active boxing federations, they really got to understand what the consequences are. If their boxing becomes a non-Olympic sport, much of their funding dries up, period. And that has been, in recent years, the foundation for pro boxing has been the amateur system, which is directly tied to Olympic boxing. So
that's certainly the case for women's boxing, right? I mean, we wouldn't have where we are without Olympic boxing. That's period. Exactly. And the thought that it would go away would absolutely be devastating to the sport.
Absolutely.
And then LA on top of it, from what I understand, NBC wants boxing at the Olympics because it gets among the better ratings. We know in LA and Southern California, boxing is a fairly popular sport. It would sell a lot of tickets to those events, get a lot of publicity. We know all those things, but there are bigger issues involved. So we're going to see what happens. But I just think it's a lot of work has to be done. I hope it gets done. I know we're supporting that it gets done, but don't count on anything. You have major federations like the Saudi Arabian Boxing Federation that is working with their Ministry of Sport and their government, and they're putting on all these major professional events and spending enormous amounts of money for the professional events in Saudi Arabia, and they built a grassroots amateur program among both men and women. They had a lot of different amateur tournaments there, and the whole thing could go away. And they've stuck with Kremlev and IBA, and the leader of it even argued before the split took place, when they wanted to have a revote for the presidency between Kremlev and Boris Vandervorst, he was one of the guys that said, no, we don't need to vote again because Kremlev is doing such a wonderful job. That's who's running the Saudi Arabian Boxing Federation, which has obviously a lot of pull in that, not only that area of the world, but in the world. You have the Japan Boxing Federation is still an IBA. How do you explain all this?
Right. Well, I hope the World Boxing, Boris and his team, really work on a campaign, a membership campaign, uh, to get the remaining federations he needs to become legitimate. So I hope you could talk to him, Eddie.
They're supposed to have a press conference, but I think they know the issues and I think they know what they're up against.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to see the crunch time is going to be right after Paris, apparently, when
Yep.
everyone's going to sort of summarize what happened in Paris and, and then make their plans. Otherwise, it's going to be like Casablanca. We'll always have Paris. And that's it.
And that's it.
And as the plane flies off.
Right. Well, look, let's talk about your piece of Patreon this past week, the heavyweights treading water. What's going on with our heavyweight division, our very sad, pathetic American heavyweight division?
Yeah, American boxing in general.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this Saturday, April 13th, Top Rank is having a show on ESPN, which it's actually going to be on TV. You remember TVs? And of course, it'll be streamed as well. I call it as rare as a solar eclipse that you could have American boxing on American TV that's going on. But they're having two heavyweight fights. And as usual, the two guys that they're really pushing are not fighting each other, but they're fighting people that they both should be pretty heavily favored and defeating. The main event has Jared Anderson, who's had a very, very rough year. And he's a guy that everybody's pushing as the next great heavyweight, although to me, he hasn't really shown that. He's a young guy, 24 years old. And he's going to be fighting a guy named Riyad Mary, who is a former cruiserweight titleist. In other words, Anderson is much bigger than him. And this guy, Mary, who had been beaten in the past by Kevin Lerena, another former cruiserweight, who was the guy that, if you remember, he fought, Lerena fought Daniel Dubois in December 22, and Dubois' knee went out in the first round, and he was knocked down 3 times because of the injury, but he recovered, and Dubois knocked out Lerena in the 3rd round. Well, this was the guy who last year Lerena beat Mary, and now they're putting Mary against Jared Anderson. Like, this is going to be a big deal. And Anderson, if you remember, also had a terrible fight last year with Charles Martin, considered by many the worst heavyweight belt holder ever. And he didn't know how to cut off the ring. He followed him around the ring. And Martin just fought to survive, which he did for the 10 rounds. But he also tagged him late a couple of times. And just a lot of basic fundamentals were absent in Anderson's performance. And then they gave him an aging journeyman named Andre Rudenko, so Anderson stopped him. But even worse than that, recently Anderson was in a high-speed car chase with Michigan police. And guess who won the car chase? It was not, he's not undefeated in car chases with the police. He was arrested. He's facing a felony charge. And he gave an interview where he admitted, it was a mistake. A mistake is, you leave your phone at home or something like that. This is something that was kind of crazy. He also gave an interview last year where he said he doesn't like boxing. He's only in it for the money, and he wants to retire in a couple of years at age 26 or 27, which is not, but you can't criticize him for that. But if you're talking about somebody that wants to fight for eventually for a heavyweight title and wants to be viewed as the next big thing the future of the heavyweight division, that's hardly an attitude. He doesn't really have
Right.
much motivation. That's the main event. The co-feature has F.A. Ajagba, the Nigerian fighter, who was really being built up when he was at PBC as a big slugger until Frank Sanchez totally dominated him in 2021, knocked him down, won a very clear decision. And he's up against an Italian fighter named Guido Vianelli, who's 12-1-1. And Vianelli, you might remember, lost last year to the journeyman Johnny Rice with a cut. None of these guys have victories over a legitimate top 10 opponent. So what would people really like to see, since they're decent fighters and we want to see how far they can go? Want to do something like they did in the UK. We had Fabio Wardley against Fraser Clark, a great fight, a fight of the year candidate. Two guys undefeated at the time, different backgrounds, and they fought to what was a split draw. Rare that you see two fighters on the way up with undefeated records fight each other, but they did that, and that got universal praise. But instead of having Anderson against Ajagba, which could be a pick'em fight, certainly a much closer fight, Top Rank is putting them against these other guys. So, look, heavyweight boxing, anything could happen. Anybody could knock anybody out at a moment, but it's very, very unlikely for this to go on. And adding to this, and I mentioned this in the article, the so-called independent ratings that are out there, independent from the sanctioning bodies, are all buying into this hype about Jared Anderson. The Ring has him as the number 7 contender. Who is he beaten to get that ranking? ESPN, where he fights on, has him as the number 8 heavyweight. And just off, when I wrote this, just off the top of my head, I would definitely rate Daniel Dubois, Ajit Kabayel, Joe Joyce, and Martin Bacoli higher in the rankings than Jared Anderson. The big deal was that about Mary was that he beat Tony Yoka, who won a dubious decision in Rio 2016 in the gold medal match against Joe Joyce. But everybody and his brother now are beating Tony Yoka in the pros now. Several guys are beating him, so it's not that big of a deal. And ESPN even has Anderson ranked higher than Frank Sanchez, who's unbeaten, is fighting tougher guys and shows a lot more talent and potential. So again, I wish we had these rankings, the old Boxing Writers rankings poll that we had many, many years ago, but we don't have anything. I mean, there are other independent rankings. But while this is going on, we're recording on a Wednesday. Earlier in the day in Morecambe in Lancashire in England, there was a press conference for what the British would say a proper heavyweight fight. Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk, May 18th in Riyadh's Kingdom Arena for the heavyweight unification. And at this press conference, which is kind of odd, about 5 weeks before the fight, you'd have a press conference with just one guy, just Tyson Fury and his team, and Frank Warren and those people were there. I call it sort of the Tyson Fury redemption tour, because Tyson Fury, as you may recall, when he fought the MMA guy in Ngannou in October, while he won that fight by decision, looked awful. He looked like, as I joked around, he had been training for a pie eating contest or something like that, rather than a heavyweight boxing match. And he got dropped in the 3rd round by this guy. And this is the same guy after he got his confidence against Fury. When he fought Anthony Joshua in March, he didn't even get out of the second round. Joshua just destroyed him. Not surprising when you have a former heavyweight champ and an Olympic gold medalist destroying an MMA guy. But because Fury looked so terrible against Ngannou, there were just a lot of people had illusions about it. So now Fury had this press conference, and he looked a lot better. He looked trimmer. He seemed to be very confident, and he wasn't as crazy as he had been at some other press conferences because Usyk wasn't there. And I think they held this press conference because Fury is taking a little break in his training. Again, it's 5 weeks out. So he's been apparently, so he says, seriously training for this fight, unlike the last fight, because he knows Usyk, although Usyk is smaller than him, he's undefeated as a professional. He himself was an Olympic gold medalist in boxing and was a former undisputed cruiserweight champion and holds 3 of the major belts in heavyweight boxing. So I think he wanted to sort of change the discussion and show, okay, I'm in the middle of my training camp, but I'm confident, I'm sane, I'm ready to go. What happened last time, basically you can draw your own conclusions, but even his Fury's manager said it looks like he didn't prepare properly, he didn't take it seriously, he didn't train properly. All that kind of stuff has been kind of obvious that people have gone over it. So I think that's why they held this press conference to get that word out. It also coincided with the beginning of the marketing push for this fight. And they had on the telephone, he couldn't be there because it was the feast at the end of Ramadan, but Turki Al-Sheikh was on phone. And he talked about how wonderful a fighter Tyson Fury is. And he said, we want you for 5, 7, 10 more fights, you know.
Oh,
so
please.
and they released a song, which you could find on Turki Al-Sheikh. I retweeted it on Twitter. They released a song and a cartoon to hype this fight. They're going to start putting tickets on sale.
What's the fight date for that, Eddie? For the Tyson
May
Fury?
the 18th in Riyadh.
Oh Lordy!
And it's a good card too. You can have Jairo Pataya against Maris Bradis, probably the top 2 cruiserweights fighting on that card. You can have Joe Cordina against Kakachi fighting for one of the belts. And I think you're also going to have Frank Sanchez on that card as well. So it's a packed card. And then there are a bunch of other undercard fights. So they're really starting to push that. Of course, around the world, it will be on pay-per-view. And I think there's a glut of pay-per-views going on. We had 2 in March with Joshua and Ngannou. If you notice, no numbers were announced for that. Nobody bragging how many were sold. Then you had the PBC card on Amazon where Tim Tszyu got beaten by Sebastian Fundora. No numbers were announced for that. So probably really did dismally. And in Australia, it was not on the Amazon pay-per-view. It was on Fox in Australia. So those numbers are separate. So I think the pay-per-view on Amazon did badly. Then you got April 20th, Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia with all the controversy around that. You got 2 weeks later, May 4th, another pay-per-view with Canelo against Jaime Munguia. And then 2 weeks later, again, you got Fury versus Usyk, which in the U.S. might not be that big of a draw, but around the world it should be. But you got this pay-per-view glut going on. And I think there's some interesting signs that perhaps the Saudi Arabians are getting cold feet about all these pay-per-views because what they did after the Joshua Ngannou show, the Knockout Chaos show, just a couple of days later, the Turkey Al-Sheikh released all the fights for free on YouTube. You can still go and watch all those fights. You can watch as one 7 hour, the 7 hour broadcast exactly as it was shown, or you could watch them separately. They really wanted people to watch this stuff. And in the old days, if you remember when there were pay-per-views on HBO and Showtime, often the next week they would air them on their networks. And then when the internet came in, you could watch them on their websites. Well, that's become history now. But I wonder whether they put them up so quickly on YouTube. They're saying we really want people to see this. They're using all these different pay-per-view providers at once: DAZN, Sky Sports, ESPN, TNT Sports, which is obviously rare that they're all showing the same thing. And I wonder whether they're starting to say, something's wrong with this model. I certainly hope so, that they find a way to ditch this model, because if you read some of the business press, there are articles about how in some of these major projects that Saudi Arabia is doing around Neom, their futuristic city, and some other projects, they're starting to scale some of those back a little bit because they were just too ambitious. And they're starting to have people look and say, okay, with all these investments, what are we getting out of it? What can we start to cut back? I think there are other reasons, such as the very tenuous political situation in that part of the world, which could threaten the whole economic development, particularly with what terrorist countries like Iran have planned and what Russia has planned. But I think they could be a little more cautious. So the question is, how is this going to affect boxing? That remains to be seen. Saudi Arabia seems to be going full steam ahead, because when Turkey Al-Sheikh called into the Fury press conference, they were hinting at a major event in London, in Wembley Stadium, put on and financed by the Saudis to promote their next Riyadh season series of events, which will not only be boxing, but of course entertainment events, plays, music, exhibits. They had things like the House of Barbie, WWE, also a Disney Castle, and things to bring in tourism and family entertainment. So they want to promote Riyadh season, which will, I believe, start again in October. So they want to do this big event in London in September. That, again, let's see what they have planned for that. So they're still going full steam ahead, but how long this is going to last, we don't know. But
No,
at
well, when
least
they start losing money offering those pay-per-view fights, and they see that they can make just as much money from YouTube by streaming those fights, I think they may change their business model.
they might. The problem isn't just losing money, because look, most businesses, when they start up, and remember, Turkey Al-Sheikh and the General Entertainment Authority have only been in charge of the boxing there since September. About 7 months. It seems longer because the amount of major fights that they've put on there. So it's relatively new, and generally businesses, particularly major businesses, and you're talking about the public investment fund of Saudi Arabia with over $700 billion to play with. Investments, you lose money in the beginning to make money down the road, but the idea is not to always lose money. So I think they're starting to look at some of that. There were fights that they financed before, for a few years before, in Saudi Arabia, but it was a different group of people running it. Now Turkey Al-Sheikh is very tight with Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. He goes back with them many years. He's an advisor to the royal court. He's not a member of the royal family, but they brought him in very close to the royals. So he's extremely powerful, deciding what goes on.
Right.
So at least we're going to get, assuming nobody gets hurt, nobody pulls out again with Fury, you have to keep your fingers crossed. We could get on May 18th, for the first time in a quarter century.
You want to bet?
And we'll see. An undisputed heavyweight champion of the world.
All right.
We'll see.
Yeah, we will see, because we've seen this picture before. We've seen
Yes.
before.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, look, we're gonna move right on along, because I heard, I've been out of the loop for a minute, that our girl Queen Serrano and Katie Taylor are going back at it. They're doing a rematch. Is that right, Melissa? Did I hear that right?
They might. I mean, there's talk of a June 8th fight date in Las Vegas. No other information on it.
Wow. Okay.
It's been percolating. It's been out on Twitter over the last day. We'll see what really happens. I know Chantel Cameron is one pissed off lady, because she was hoping to be fighting Katie Taylor for their third outing in May. That ain't happening. So we'll see if they can actually put together a Serrano Taylor 2. That'll be an amazing fight. That'll of course be at 3-minute rounds. But 2-minute rounds if they fight. But it'd be curious to see what weight they fight at, because Taylor's given up her lightweight undisputed titles. She's now firmly at super light. You got Serrano, who has 3 titles at featherweight. The WBC title she gave up because she wasn't going to defend it with 3-minute rounds. So I really don't know what this is going to look like. Are they going to fight 3-minute rounds? 12-3, 10-3? Unknown. We will see. We need to know what weight are they going to fight in. What are the rounds going to look like? Very interesting to see how this will unfold. And I haven't been able to dig anything out other than the rumor that they're going to fight on the 8th in June, on the 8th, which is a Saturday night in Vegas. So we'll see what transpires. Meanwhile, for women's boxing, if you're looking to find some kind of champions fighting in the USA, you're out of luck, because there aren't any.
The hell's going on?
Unless you tune into Team Combat League, which is where all the champions are fighting for one round or 2 rounds. Yes, Team Combat League. It is a pro boxing league. It has teams in several cities. New York City Attitude is one. They have 4 fighters.
Oh, is that with Shelly Vincent?
Yeah, Shelly Vincent is fighting on the Boston team.
Oh, wow.
But let me tell you about the New York City team. Okay, you got Mio Yoshida. Mio Yoshida is the IBF bantamweight fighter, right? She defeated Ebony Bridges in December. Does she have a fight coming up? No. How is she putting bread on the table for her daughter? She's fighting on Team Combat League. All right.
Wow.
Okay. The other fighters in New York, you got Melissa St. V. You got Ronica Jeffries. These are 2 great old gang fighters, champions. And drum roll, please, Alicia Napoleon is back.
Wow.
Right? Alicia Napoleon, former champion, had a baby. Her daughter is now about 2.5, 3 years old. She was gonna have a fight. Things happened. She wasn't able to have it, but she's on Team Combat League. And last week, 2 weeks ago, in her first outing, she floored the woman she fought. But if that's not enough, you want to hear what other champions are fighting this week? You got Erica Farias, one of the greatest fighters ever out of Argentina. Where is she fighting? Team Combat League.
What?
Okay. Yeah, she's fighting on a Team Combat League card.
Wow.
right? That is crazy. I'm
But
sorry.
these are
That
just one round
they
each.
fight for 1 or 2 rounds. Yep, they fight for
What?
1 or 2 rounds. It's not it's on BoxRec, but it's not counted against their pro. They have a separate category just for team combat
So
league.
it's like a semi-pro league.
It's a
If
pro
it's
league.
not,
You got Ginny Fuchs, you know. Ginny Fuchs is supposedly a top ranked fighter, right? She's an Olympian. She's all of these great. Is she going to be on any ESPN? Is she on the ESPN card this weekend with top rank? No.
no,
Is she going to be on any other cards with top rank? No.
no.
But she is fighting in Houston on the 18th on Team Combat League. Okay. So this is some crazy stuff.
Okay,
If you want to see,
I'm a little confused though. Why form a league and then only have them fight for one round?
well, this is just what they do. They get special incentives if they knock somebody out. It's a thing.
Okay.
You've got 5, 6, 8 fighters, 10 fighters. They each rotate. They fight around. If they get a knockout, they get a little bonus. It's not like it's like a little mini tournament. It doesn't count towards their regular boxing record because it's not a real fight in that sense. But it's
Right.
league. They get paid $6,000-8,000 a month. That's more than some
Oh.
of these women make in a fight.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
And they're in a team, they get their travel, they
Okay,
so
who's backing that? Who's the financier for that league?
I am
Where's that
digging
money
in on
coming
that.
from?
And next time we do this, we will
Right.
dig in further. I'm
We need
just
to
so
have Shelly back
stunned.
on here.
Yeah, because Shelly is fighting this weekend in Boston. And the 4 ladies I mentioned are fighting in Tampa. They're fighting a team in Tampa. In Orlando. They're all down there now. You got fights happening at the arena in Philadelphia, and you got fights in Houston over the next 2 weeks. Just
Right.
crazy stuff.
That is
Meanwhile, this weekend there is some great boxing. There's the Super Bantam. There's going to be a unification fight between Ellie Scottney and Selene Lefebvre. Sorry for really destroying those names,
right.
but they're going to be fighting for the IBF and WBO World Super Bantam titles on a DAZN card, so we'll be able to see it in the U.S. There's a second women's fight. It's 10-2 with Rahanan Dixon and Karen Elizabeth Carabajo. So that should also be a very good fight and really worth seeing. Then you got to jump down to May for the next really big fight. Oh, I'm sorry, April 27th, you got Beatriz Ferreira fighting Yanina Del Carmen for a title. Beatriz Ferreira is this really amazing woman out of Brazil. She's got iron for fists.
Wow.
So that should be a very exciting fight, again on DAZN. And then the next really big fight, 2 really big fights on May 11th, Saturday, May 11th in Cardiff, Wales. We have Jessica McCaskill, who will be in Wales fighting, sort of the pride of Wales, Lauren Price, for 2 welterweight titles. So that's going to be a really big fight. Then has the potential of then matching up someone with Natasha Jonas down the line.
Right.
And that is going to be on Sky, and in the US will be on Peacock because they have the deal for boxer fights. And then in another championship fight will be the WBA World Bantam between Nina Hughes finally getting her opportunity to fight. She'll be fighting Trineka Johnson in Perth. And you've got Dina Thorsland, she has 2 WBA titles. She will also be fighting within the next month. I think her date is May 25th, so a little bit further out. But meanwhile, Mio Yoshida, who has the 4th belt, is making money, earning money to feed her daughter by fighting on Team Combat League, because nobody's knocking on her door for a championship fight.
Right.
Meanwhile, Dina Thorsland is fighting someone who's 11-0, no record at all, just baby belts out of Turkey. I mean, that should be a fight with me. I don't understand it. And in the United States, it's just zero, absolutely zero. All of those fights we talked to, all those pay-per-view cards we talked about, zero women on those cards. You think I'm going to spend money to watch no women? I don't care who's fighting.
Exactly.
Saudi Arabia, still no women on those cards. In fact, Jane Couch, who single-handedly legalized boxing for women in the United Kingdom in 1998, she's been sort of dogging the Saudis. Going, where's the women? And I've gone on that bandwagon, and we just keep pushing this out. Because they're talking about, the Saudis are saying, we don't want any more clown fights here. We want real boxing. 4 or 5.
Wow, what an insult.
Oh, that's great. No more clown fights. Awesome. Where are the women?
Right.
Where you want the best fighting the best, then you better start putting some of the best women in the world on your fight cards. What's going on here, dudes? You think there aren't any in Eddie Hearn's stable of Matchroom? You think there aren't any women in Frank Warren's little stable? They're there. Where are the fights? So I'm just kind of, I'm PO'd because every time out you have great boxing. We just saw Sinisa Estrada fight Yocosta Valle 2 weeks ago for the undisputed fight, undisputed at 105 pounds. Amazing fight. Was on ESPN. Was it the main event? No. It was the second down. Okay.
ESPN Plus, I think, was it?
No, it was on ESPN Plus. Second fight. What the hell?
Right. Women's boxing was on fire. Now it's come to a standstill, it seems.
It's on fire, yeah. Where? In England, in the UK, it's on fire. And look, where's Justin McCaskill defending her?
Clarissa?
It's not here. Clarissa doesn't have a fight. Who should
Peter Fury put out that there should be a second for a rematch between Clarissa Shields and Savannah Marshall. And I hope it's going to be in boxing and not in MMA, because they're both also doing MMA.
Yeah,
it would be absurd to do it in wrestling.
Yeah, no. But I think Savannah has her first PFL fight coming up, and then if they're going to do it, then it'll be after that. And I hope they do. I hope they do replay it, because it would be a very good fight. I mean, they got to do something in boxing.
Right.
You know, it's also in some ways odd about what the Saudis are doing. The promoters that they're working with the most closely are, as you mentioned, Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn, both of whom have a number of women fighters and have put on a lot of women fighters, including in main events. We've discussed a lot of those before. The Saudi Arabian Boxing Federation, which I criticized for staying in IBA, the vice president of it is a woman, Rasha Al-Khamas, who has organized young girls and young women to fight in amateur events all the time. And they're growing that on a grassroots basis. Also, if you remember, before the Joshua Ngannou fight, when they had their open media workout type of thing, Joshua didn't have a real workout, but he brought in several young amateur boxers into the ring with him and their coach, and they were all sparring. And they were both young men and young women. And I don't know how old they are. I mean, I'm getting old. It's hard for me to judge age, whether they were teenagers or a little bit older. But they were amateur boxers, both young men and young women, shadow boxing on the media workout for the Joshua Ngannou big fight that was being put on. Yet all these cards so far that have been put on under Turki Al-Sheikh have had zero women. And the only time they had a woman fight there was a couple of years ago when they had Ramla Ali,
right,
blow out her opponent in one round. And that was again before Turkey Yellow Sheikh and the General Entertainment Authority took over the boxing program. So why can't they have women's fights? Who is blocking it there? You got
Exactly.
your the promoters you have. I mean, they're working with many other promoters around the world. They work with Dimitri Salita, of course, who promotes Clarissa Shields, and they work with other promoters too. You have the promoters there. You have the contacts there of the top women fighters in the world. You know, for
Yeah,
the promoters
exactly.
of Clarissa Shields, of Katie Taylor, of so many others that are out there. So they shouldn't be that shouldn't be an obstacle to getting them
Yeah.
on your show, but they're not doing it, and somebody is blocking it there. And if they really want to show that they're starting to make some changes there, they should really put women on the cards. In the World Combat Games last year, it wasn't complete parity, but there was almost as many women athletes in these different martial arts and combat sports as there were male athletes. And they've had women competing in other non-combat sports in Saudi Arabia. So what's holding up boxing? Somebody's
Yeah.
blocking it there, and it is a huge mistake.
I agree with you. I'm disgusted by the whole thing. I think it's very unfair. I mean, women have a hard enough time trying to get on fight cards, trying to get, opportunities. And as I said, there are fights. There are women fighting in the USA over the next 4 weekends, but they're on, little club cards because there's no other main boxing here. I mean, it's sad, but it's the truth. It's more than a marginalized sport at this time. And you've got these, PBC refuses to put women on their cards, so I
Sexist.
refuse to ever watch their shows. I'm sorry, I
Right.
don't care who you have on your card.
And
I'm not going to watch it.
they have not learned a basic lesson about women's sports in the
No.
last week. And I'm just going to read, the numbers because I don't particularly follow or watch basketball.
Right.
But
Oh, well, I watched that game.
the most watched college championship basketball game of all time was
Yep.
the women's final that took
Yep.
place. Iowa ended up losing that, but
It was Iowa versus South Carolina, who had a perfect season, 38-0.
and
Amazing.
something like 18.7 million people on
Woo.
ESPN watched it.
That's right. Exactly right.
I would also say a few weeks ago, the NCAA Division I wrestling championships were on ESPN, and it was either the lowest or one of the lowest ratings they ever got. Only about 400,000 people watched it on ESPN. And people say, well, there were people streaming. This is true. There were people streaming the wrestling. Guess what? There were people streaming the basketball too.
Yep.
So why
Yeah,
do you have
they were.
do the math? How many times bigger is 18 million than 400,000? Isn't something like over 40 times bigger? So now you have over 40 times more people watching women's college basketball than watching men's college wrestling, a sport that for years and years resisted having women's divisions and was a second to the last sport to have a women's division in the Olympics. That was 2004 to boxing in 2012. And still, women's wrestling is considered an NCAA emerging sport. And in a couple of years, it'll probably be a full NCAA sport. But why is it taking so long in 2024 for this? It's the same misogyny, and the people running it have not learned a damn thing. Instead,
No, they haven't.
I don't want to go too far off, but
No, and it's the same thing. You look at in high school wrestling.
they've turned college wrestling into a right-wing Christian nationalist dominated sport, and they're losing just about everybody else. In high school, from what I read, the fastest growing in the U.S. high school sport are girls wrestling.
That's
in high
right.
school.
That is absolutely right.
The
Girls
fa-
wrestling
any-
is
of any of
killing
the-
it. Killing it.
Yeah,
Wow.
Absolutely killing it.
but
And
they don't,
shattering
and
all
they're not on.
records.
They're not on TV. Iowa
No.
this year the first time had a women's wrestling team. And Iowa men's wrestling sold out Carver Hawkeye Arena again. I think just about every meet. They have a TV deal. They were on different networks at different times. I didn't see any television listings for Iowa women, even though that's probably the best women's college wrestling team in the U.S. It's the same nonsense. Meanwhile, look what's going on with women's college basketball, breaking all these records, and it looks like you're going to have Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese going to the draft for the WNBA. This should be a real boost for the WNBA.
No, it should. And Angel Reese has a really smart team. She's on this month's Vogue magazine.
Wow.
I mean, she is fierce looking, and she is in Vogue.
All right.
Wearing amazing clothing as part of this brand development. So, certainly the business side of sports promotion has figured out, you know what? We better start betting on women.
That's right. Bet on
and
women.
Angel Reese, she is killing it in terms of that visibility and promoting herself and positioning herself as sort of next gen in terms of really busting out women as really important sports athletes outside of tennis, if you know what I mean.
Right. Well, look, folks, Eddie, do you want to cover anything else before we wrap this up?
I just want to mention that our friend Barry McGuigan, former world champion trainer, there's a very interesting interview that he had on BBC Sport Live with Steve Bunce. You can go to that website and listen to it. And he and his gym and his family and the fighters they have are the subject of a 4-part documentary on BBC called Stable, which is not available outside of the UK, unfortunately. Hopefully they'll make that available, but it's gotten a lot of praise for that. So if people are in the UK, if they could watch that on the BBC iPlayer, and anybody can go to BBC Radio 5 Live Boxing with Steve Bunce and listen to that lengthy interview with Barry McGuigan. It's getting like a lot of mainstream coverage. So some places boxing is getting the attention that it deserves. Other places, particularly the United States of America, it's been completely mismanaged and running down the John. So got that going on. And the article that I mentioned earlier about the heavyweights treading water, you could subscribe to my Patreon, support independent media, unlike these other sites that are tied to various networks and promoters and have conflicts of interest and just basically provide a lot of just dumb things down one after the other. Go to my Patreon at patreon.com/Eddie Goldman and subscribe to that. You get a lot of updates and articles, and my website is eddiegoldman.com. And I've been saying this, well, just maybe I'll do an episode or two of my old podcast if I get the feeling again and catch up on some other things, but we'll see what happens with that. And I'm still on Twitter, believe it or not, as hard as it is to stay there. I have not found a better alternative. There's all kinds of crap going on there. I'm probably posting less, like most people who are still on there are posting less than they have in recent years. But go to NHB News on Twitter, and you can see me there. That's where I am.
Right on, Eddie. Great work that you continue to do. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Melissa, I want everybody to know what you've been working on. Tell us about that little book project you got going on.
Oh, yeah. Well, my book, The Promise of Women's Boxing, a momentous A Momentous New Era for the Sweet Science will be published on June 4th. I'm starting to ramp up publicity for the book to kind of drum up some excitement. So I've been doing a lot of podcasts and interviews. I'm going to be on a radio show next week that's going to broadcast on Pacifica.
All
And
right.
then I'm doing and I'm starting to do podcasts that are not just boxing focused.
Yeah.
I'm doing one called The Core Woman, which is a women's empowerment site. And I'm
Fantastic.
very excited to talk to them and sort of broaden out the conversation, using women's boxing as a lens, but really connect it to the larger social issues of equity, pay equity,
Absolutely.
war on women, all the other kind of stuff. So that's kind of exciting. I have a new website, my author website, which is melissa-smith.com, malissa-smith.com.
Right.
It has, a new logo and links to my
right.
usual stuff, but it's kind of fun. Links to my book. And that's about the size of it, that and caregiving for Jed. And that's been challenging, but I really am trying to also do work to destigmatize dementia and to let everybody know it's just part of life,
Right.
It's another phase. Some people get, one kind of illness, other people get another kind of illness, but you're dealing. I'm still on Twitter. Mostly I'm just really focusing on boxing there. I still live tweet boxing events and cross-germinate. So I'm at Girl Boxing now there on Instagram. I'm on there a lot. Girl Boxing on Facebook, and putting out a lot of content whenever I have it, both related to the book, but also articles and podcasts that I'm on. Trying to just sort of drum up stuff. And I'm on LinkedIn a lot. So if anyone wants to connect to me on LinkedIn. And if you're in Brooklyn on June 15th, come to Gleason's Gym, 7:00, book launch event. I'm starting to put together a women's boxing, a panel to talk about the state of women's boxing. I've got a few commitments. Raquel Cepeda, who's an author and wonderful filmmaker, will be sort of the moderator for me. She'll be my MC. And I have tentative commitments from Alicia Napoleon and Shelley Vincent so far to be on the panel to talk about the experiences of being a woman boxer. And then, you'll get to talk to me. And I am turning 70 in June.
What?
So we're going to also have big cake.
Holy moly.
Yes, 70. Woo woo.
Cannot
So I'm very excited about that.
Wow.
So 3 days after my book launch is June 18th, I'll be 70. And I'm here to represent, being gray-haired and a septuagenarian, and you can still do shit,
That's right, because you are still boxing. I see you at Gleason's on IG.
Yeah, I'm back at it. In fact, I'm going tomorrow. I'm gonna, it's funny with my trainer, Len Blackmore. He got a pacemaker last year, so between the two of them, he's 73. So they're like Altakaka boxing. It's really kind of cute.
Right.
But we keep each other standing.
That's amazing. Well, thank you.
I will be there training tomorrow.
Right on. Sending our love, because I know caregiving is tough, so we're sending all the best to Jed and your family.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, folks, that wraps it up for us today in the War Room. I am your fight goddess. You guys, please check out our website, WAARsports.com. That's WAARS sports.com. You can find me on Instagram at FightGoddess1. I'm still on shitter. I keep trying to leave, but I can't break up with Twitter because, first of all, you guys are there. So I'm still there at Angry Afro Radio. And until next time, folks, peace, love, and push-ups.